Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opened on May 31st, 2019 at Disneyland and August 29th, 2019 at Hollywood Studios, with this project representing Disney's most ambitious park expansion in decades. With massive budgets and multi-year planning, it was intended to be a new way to experience Star Wars in real life, a direct response to Universal's massive success with Hogsmeade and Diagon Alley. Yet, when it opened, and still to this day, reactions are quite mixed. Many concepts were cut, and attendance numbers, ignoring the decline due to the pandemic, have mostly been stagnant. So today, I wanted to take an in-depth look at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and understand why a land based on one of the most popular media franchises of all time has had such an indifferent reception. But before Galaxy's Edge took over 14 acres of land in the back corner of Disney's Hollywood Studios, the space it occupies now was home to a different kind of story, one that reflected the park's original identity as a working studio. The Streets of America section of Disney's Hollywood Studios was a large backlot-style area designed to resemble New York City and San Francisco. It originally served as both a themed walkthrough area and part of the backlot tour. Over time, it gained a mix of attractions, shows, and seasonal experiences. One of those attractions was the Studio Backlot Tour, once a flagship attraction of Hollywood Studios, which was a symbol of the park's mission to offer guests a behind-the-scenes look at filmmaking. Opening with the park in 1989, this expansive tour originally lasted nearly 2 hours, taking guests behind the scenes of working movie sets. Over time, its scope diminished, but elements like Catastrophe Canyon, where guests rode into a desert-like canyon and experienced a staged disaster, still made it a nostalgic favorite for many longtime guests. There was also a stunt show called Lights, Motors, Action, which was a car-based stunt show featuring stunt drivers, pyrotechnics, and behind-the-scenes filmmaking demonstrations. Another standout for younger guests was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set adventure, a playground theme to the film with oversized movie props and structures. The Streets of America was also home to one of the most beloved seasonal offerings in Walt Disney World history, the Osborne family spectacle of dancing lights, a massive Christmas light display that graced Disney's Hollywood Studios every holiday season from 1995 to 2015. The display originally began as a personal project by Jennings Osborne, a wealthy businessman from Arkansas. Starting in the 1980s, Osborne decorated his home with over 1 million lights for his daughter. As the display grew over the years, it gained national attention, and eventually numerous complaints from neighbors, which ultimately led to a lawsuit forcing the lights to be significantly scaled back. In response, Disney offered to relocate the display to their own park, where it debuted on the residential street section of the Backlot Tour in 1995. Over time, the lights were removed to the Streets of America and expanded significantly. In 2006, Disney added the dancing technology, where lights pulsed and flashed in sync with music, turning it into an even more impressive experience. And it became a must-see tradition for many guests and a cornerstone of the holiday celebrations at the park. The final season was held in 2015, with no comparable replacement ever introduced, which is made especially painful since Disney also quietly retired the Dreamlights on Cinderella Castle at Magic Kingdom. And as Disney shifted focus away from the studio concept in favor of more immersive, story-driven lands, the Streets of America finally closed its doors on April 2nd, 2016, to make way for a new experience. When Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012 for over $4 billion, fans began speculating at a Star Wars-themed land at one of their parks. That speculation came to fruition at D23 Expo in August 2015, when CEO Bob Iger officially announced Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, a brand new land coming to both Disneyland and Disney's Hollywood Studios. Disney Imagineering began development on Galaxy's Edge in April 2016 in collaboration with Lucasfilm. Early concepts floated familiar planets like Tatooine and Endor, which in Hollywood Studios would have overtaken Echo Lake so it could be built around the already existing Star Tours attraction. However, due to the at-the-time upcoming Disney-produced sequel trilogy, which would introduce new characters, droids, and planets, a decision was made to build the land in an original setting rather than rooting it in the original, more dated time period. Born was the idea of Batuu, specifically Black Spire Outpost, which is set in a time period between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. The goal was for the land to be a single-themed, highly immersive experience where guests would feel like they were transported to another planet, with no overt Star Wars logos, no typical Disney signage, and merchandise and goods being imagined as goods from the Outpost rather than souvenirs from a gift shop. Now, just a little heads up, in this video, I'm going to be covering the Hollywood Studios version of Galaxy's Edge since it's the one I'm most familiar with. Although the lands are mostly identical aside from some differences in roaming characters, but I will mention that when appropriate. Galaxy's Edge is now the largest single-themed land at Walt Disney World, taking up roughly 20% of the guest-accessible park area of Hollywood Studios. The layout of the land is designed to feel organic. There are numerous winding paths and towering rockwork that block views in and out of the land, helping to preserve that immersion. It encourages exploration and creates a rewarding feeling discovering new areas and smaller details. For example, rather than the Millennium Falcon being front and center as you enter the area, whether you're coming from Toy Story Land or near Grand Avenue, you need to navigate the winding paths of Black Spire Outpost before coming to the iconic reveal. The path through the Black Spire Outpost Market is also a great example of just how lived in and immersive this land feels. The narrow path through here is partially covered with tarps and wires strung overhead, and local Batuans live on the upper levels while the lower levels house shops that sell clothing, goods, and toys that are diegetic to the world itself. The land's headline experiences are two attractions, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run and Rise of the Resistance. Upon the opening of each land, only one of these rides, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, was operational at launch. Rise of the Resistance opened later, December 5th, 2019 in Florida, and January 17th, 2020 in California. Smuggler's Run is an interactive motion simulator where guests take control of the Millennium Falcon in varying roles. The queue for this ride begins outdoors, winding beneath the full-scale Millennium Falcon. Guests move through a spaceport facility operated by Onaka Transport Solutions, a company run by the Weequay pirate Hondo Onaka. The interior queue is a combination of industrial hallways, maintenance bays, and multi-level walkways, which provide overhead views of the Millennium Falcon and the spaceport. In the pre-show room, guests are introduced to an animatronic of Hondo. He explains the mission. Guests are to pilot the Falcon on his behalf to steal a volatile hyperfuel, coaxium. Hondo is then joined by Chewbacca, who has loaned the ship to him, which adds a familiar face for more casual fans who may be unfamiliar with Hondo. The pre-show ends with guests moving into a holding room, where they enter the Millennium Falcon's main lounge area, a highly themed space fitted appropriately with a Jark table, lockers, and other various props, as well as the iconic hallways of the ship. Each motion simulator holds 6 guests divided into 3 roles. Pilots, who fly the ship and have the most impact on the ride's trajectory, gunners, who have the objective of protecting the ship by firing guns at enemies, and engineers, who fix the ship when it's damaged by pressing a series of buttons when they light up. The experience itself is a motion simulator with a wraparound screen, powered by real-time rendered graphics through Unreal Engine. It blends ride motion, physical controls, and synchronized visuals to simulate flying the ship. The mission takes guests to Corellia, where they attempt to steal coaxium from a moving train. Throughout the journey, guests navigate through debris fields, evade TIE fighters, and make hyperspace jumps. The environment reacts to riders' inputs, most notably the pilots, and a score is calculated based on your performance. Because of this interactivity, the experience and ride length can vary between groups, whether that's sickening movement or the ride getting cut short because the ship is damaged. The cockpit itself is highly themed with screens, lights, and audio that reacts dynamically to your progress and the condition of the ship. While personally I think the visuals of the queue and the interior of the ride simulator are incredibly impressive, the ride experience itself, in my opinion, is quite underwhelming. Unless you're assigned as a pilot, the ride can feel very repetitive and mostly just out of your control. If you have bad pilots, you could end up continuously crashing the ship over and over again, making for a pretty unpleasant experience, especially for those who are easily motion sick. Although interactive ride experiences can be seen as intuitive and unique, I personally dislike having to rely on other guests for an enjoyable or even average ride experience, especially if I've waited an hour or more for it. Comparably, Star Tours, which opened in 1989, is also a Star Wars-themed motion simulator that doesn't rely on interactivity between guests, and has numerous scenes where you travel to different planets and have different encounters that are all randomly selected, allowing for impressive rewritability, especially considering the regularly short wait time for the attraction. Some may find the ride technology outdated or boring, but I personally find the ride experience a lot more interesting and engaging since I can focus on the story in front of me rather than dividing my attention between the story and one of 3 tasks, all while experiencing chaotic simulator movement. It's definitely one of those less is more situations for me. Now onto Rise of the Resistance, which is widely regarded as one of the best theme park attractions in the world. While it can simply be described as a dark ride, doing so would be quite an injustice. It's more of a multi-part experience that combines multiple impressively themed and interactive pre-shows as well as ride systems to create a cinematic-style adventure that places guests directly into a Star Wars storyline. Guests enter through a rugged path built into the rocky cliffs of Batuu, leading into a concealed resistance base. The queue winds through jungle foliage, tunnels, and makeshift command centers, suggesting that the Resistance is operating out of a hidden outpost. In the first pre-show, guests gather inside a Resistance command center where an animatronic BB-8 rolls around the upper platform. A hologram of Rey appears and briefs guests that a group of Resistance agents have boarded a Star Destroyer that is en route to Batuu, and explains that we will need to make our way to Bakara, where Leia is, since the Resistance base here is no longer safe. Next, guests exit the building and board a full-scale Resistance Intersystem transport ship. This segment is a room on a moving platform that moves guests into the next pre-show room. While standing inside the cabin, the ship physically moves and rocks to simulate takeoff, hyperspace travel, and eventually capture by the First Order. Midway through the journey, the ship is intercepted, and as the doors open, guests are pulled into one of the most iconic and breathtaking reveals in any theme park attraction. A full-scale Star Destroyer hangar bay, complete with rows of stormtroopers, projection screens simulating space, and a full-scale TIE fighter. Here, guests are now prisoners of the First Order. Cast members who are now in character as First Order officers sternly escort guests to detention cells, where Kylo Ren begins to interrogate them. Mid-scene, the wall is cut open and members of the Resistance group appear to rescue guests from captivity and board them into escape vehicles that are being piloted by droids. From here, the dark ride portion begins as you move through a multi-level ride experience where you narrowly avoid stormtroopers firing at you, maneuver through built-to-scale AT-ATs, confront Kylo Ren, dodge firing cannons, which unfortunately no longer move like they did when the attraction first opened, and finish the ride off with a dramatic escape pod sequence where your vehicle is locked into place and free falls down about 2 stories as you make your way back to Batuu. The experience of this attraction as a whole definitely puts it into my list of top 5 theme park attractions of all time. To me, it feels like it was one of the new age pioneers that encouraged a new level of complexity and immersion in attraction design. And while I have gripes that there are parts of the ride that are no longer functional, wait times are consistently high, and the ride experiences frequent downtime due to the trackless ride system, the attraction perfectly blends the lines between queue, pre-show, and one of the most immersive dark ride portions I have ever been on, creating a near seamless narrative experience that I could not praise enough. One of the most significant losses was the original plan for additional attractions, most notably a second e-ticket that was rumored to have been a thrilling, fast-paced speeder bike attraction. The ride was originally planned to be set on Endor, which would have used a combination of physical sets, projection mapping, and high-speed movement to simulate zipping between trees and dodging obstacles. However, when the decision was made to set Galaxy's Edge on the original planet of Batuu, the speeder bike ride no longer fit thematically and was scrapped. There was also a few other plans cut, such as a ride where you would board a ferry which would transport you around the land, and a walkthrough attraction featuring animatronic Lothcats and other creatures. Mostly due to budget constraints, as Rise of the Resistance became more expensive and complex than initially planned, these projects ended up being cancelled as well. In addition to the 2 headliner rides, there are also experiences where you can build your own lightsaber and customize your own droid. Tucked behind a discreet facade in the Black Spire outpost is Savvy's workshop. The idea is that guests are visiting a hidden enclave of gatherers who are sympathetic to the Jedi Order. Inside the workshop, guests gather around a central table where they can select one of 4 design themes and their Kyber crystal, which determines the selection of parts and the blade's color. After assembly, the finished saber is activated in unison with others around the room. Guests can also visit the nearby droid depot, a bustling workshop that is designed to make you feel like you're scavenging for parts to build a droid. Guests first choose between building an R-Series or BB-Series droid. Then, a conveyor belt of parts continuously moves along the building area, offering components to customize their own droid, where they can then bring them to an assembly station and complete the build. Once activated, the droids respond to movement, have programmable sounds, and can interact with beacons placed around Galaxy's Edge. Both Savvy's Workshop and Droid Depot are limited capacity experiences, and advanced reservations are typically required for Savvy's Workshop. Additionally, they are both upcharge experiences, coming in at $249 for the lightsaber and $119 for the droid. While both experiences are unique and the end product feels very premium, they aren't high enough quality to feel like collector's grade items, and yet are still prohibitively expensive for families and casual fans. Additionally, the customization, while a neat aspect, isn't nearly as extensive as you might initially think, resulting in your final creation feeling a lot less personal. It's also worth noting that unlike shows or rides, neither of these experiences have much repeat value to them, since they're incredibly expensive and most people probably aren't going to want multiple of the same item. The crown jewel of Galaxy's Edge retail is Doc Ondar's Den of Antiques, a highly immersive shop filled with rare artifacts from across the Star Wars galaxy, many of which reference characters, planets, and stories from both the films and the extended lore. Guests can find everything from legacy lightsabers and Jedi and Sith relics to busts, holocrons, and ancient-looking wall art. This store is a treasure trove for diehard fans, and at the center of it all is an animatronic of Doc Ondar himself, who manages the shop. Even if you're not buying anything, it's worth walking through just to take in the details, and should have been the set standard for the numerous shops around Galaxy's Edge. Unfortunately, not all the retail locations had the same level of care put into them. For example, First Order Cargo feels more like an afterthought and is arguably the weakest of the land's retail experiences. Inside, you'll find mostly generic apparel, toys, and accessories branded with the First Order logo, but not much else to hold your attention. The shop lacks the immersive detail and storytelling found in places like Doc Ondar's or the Black Spire Outpost Marketplace. And outside the shop, you just have this really awkward, overly large courtyard that lacks much of anything and feels like a really poor use of space. In an effort to deepen the interactivity within Galaxy's Edge, Disney also incorporated features from the Play Disney Parks mobile app to transform your smartphone into an in-universe datapad. The idea was to extend the story beyond physical attractions, offering guests a chance to engage with the land through missions and puzzles. However, the gameplay mostly boils down to scanning QR codes around the land, then reading text and tapping through dialogue trees, which feels incredibly uninspired and mostly just tedious. The environment is supposed to react to your activity, but it's incredibly unrewarding as at most you get some lights that blink or beeping noises.
I got it!
While there are criticisms to be had for the price point of the interactive wands and power-up bands at Universal, the interactivity with those are much more engaging, and I'd personally rather have a tangible item to engage with the land rather than being on my phone, something that is far less unique and pulls me out of the immersion. Something I do find to be an immersive aspect of Galaxy's Edge are the roaming characters. In Hollywood Studios, guests often encounter characters like Rey, Chewbacca, Kylo Ren, and First Order Stormtroopers wandering through Black Spire Outpost, interacting with guests in character rather than posing for traditional meet and greets. Occasionally, a remote-controlled droid known as BDX can also be seen rolling around and reacting to its environment, though this is more common in Disneyland rather than in Hollywood Studios. Over at Disneyland, character presence is generally more frequent and varied, with additions like Luke Skywalker and Boba Fett making appearances as part of the park's more flexible timeline approach. While Hollywood Studios has remained mostly locked into the sequel trilogy setting, Disneyland has allowed for more cross-era appearances, creating more surprise moments and emotional payoffs for fans of different generations. However, while the roaming characters are a great addition, the land is still mostly devoid of aliens and other droids, something incredibly prominent to the franchise that often makes the land feel more empty than it should be. Moving on to dining options, Galaxy's Edge offers a couple different choices, such as Docking Bay 7, a well-themed quick-service restaurant themed as a converted hangar bay with shipping crates and repurposed cargo containers turned into dining booths. Ronto Roasters is themed as a marketplace stall serving food cooked by a droid under a pod racing engine.
Now this is pod racing.
Kat Sokka's Kettle, a small snack kiosk in the Black Spire Outpost Marketplace, sells colorful popcorn and themed drinks. There's also the Milk Stand, serving iconic blue and green milk beverages, which most people find to taste terrible, and I tend to agree with them. And lastly, Oga's Cantina, which in my opinion is by far one of the most immersive and successful elements of Galaxy's Edge. Heavily inspired by the classic Mos Eisley Cantina and complete with entertainment from DJ Rex, since he's no longer employed by Star Tours. Oga's Cantina is a bar with unique Star Wars-themed drink options and a couple of well-themed small plates. However, the space can feel relatively small, and tables are communal, meaning oftentimes you'll be paired with another family, something that I personally don't enjoy. Additionally, you're also restricted to a 45-minute time limit, as well as a 2-drink maximum, likely to increase guest turnover since demand is incredibly high still to this day. Notably, Galaxy's Edge lacks a full-service sit-down venue, an unusual choice for a land of this scope. Galaxy's Edge was originally planned to include a full-service restaurant with immersive elements, possibly even a dinner show, which would have featured live performers and animatronics, offering a more upscale dining experience within the land. However, the project was reportedly cut during budget revisions, with some of its interactive concepts being repurposed for the now-defunct Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser. The plot for this dining location still exists just behind Oga's Cantina, although it now seems to be just used as a parking lot and additional storage. Disney could certainly bring this original plan back to fruition now easier than ever, but we've yet to see that happen. One of the most persistent criticisms of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge revolves around its setting. Batuu is a completely original planet created specifically for the land rather than using a familiar location from the films. Instead of creating iconic planets like Tatooine or Endor as originally planned, the intent was to provide guests with a neutral yet canon location that could exist across multiple timelines. At the time of development, this did make sense. Disney was heavily invested in the sequel trilogy, and Batuu was meant to anchor the new stories and its characters. However, as the sequel films grew more divisive among fans, the decision to omit the original trilogy characters and locations started to look more questionable. For many fans, the heart of Star Wars lies in the original trilogy, and critically, this means that Galaxy's Edge doesn't capitalize on the nostalgic iconography that most guests, and especially casual fans like myself, associate with Star Wars. The idea of creating an original land like Batuu where you could bring in thematic elements from other planets, play with the idea of different characters visiting, and offer up food and goods from across the galaxy is a fantastic idea in theory. However, in execution, Disney never really expanded on the lore to create a rich and in-depth story, and the world for the most part is still locked into a very specific timeline due to Batuu's tie-in with the Galactic Starcruiser that ultimately failed, likely due to its incredibly high price for an experience very few ultra-hardcore fans would have any interest in. Now that the Starcruiser is gone, Disney has the opportunity to develop new attractions, shows, and further expand upon the lore and have inclusions from these different planets, but we've yet to see them take any action on that. Another noticeable exclusion from Galaxy's Edge is music. Outside of Oga's Cantina and a few attraction cues, the land forgoes any background music and instead focus on the ambient sounds like ship engines and droid noises. The design choice was to enhance the idea that the environment feels lived in rather than cinematic. However, in my opinion, the absence of familiar themes again lessens the nostalgic impact that I could get from this land. I understand that theme parks are moving in a direction that caters to highly immersive, single-themed experiences, but in the process of attempting to be as immersive as possible, sometimes it feels like we're leaving things out that make theme parks fun and enjoyable in the first place. Lastly, likely due to many of the cut attractions and experiences, and despite this being the largest land in all of Hollywood Studios, there is just a ton of unused space, which often makes a lot of the land feel very empty. Not in an atmospheric kind of way, but in a boring and uninteresting way, especially the long stretch of path between Rise of the Resistance and the Market section. I understand a lot of concepts were cancelled due to budget restrictions, but even after over 5 years of operation, it still seems like the land hasn't expanded much beyond what was initially offered during opening, especially since a lot of the experiences here are monetized rather than simply being included with your admission. Galaxy's Edge, for what it is still an incredibly impressive land. It's immersive, intricately designed, and it represents a major shift in standards and creativity for themed experiences. The decision to create an original in-universe story rather than retelling familiar ones was bold and admirable, but it also severely limited the land's emotional connection with many guests. And while Rise of the Resistance shows what Imagineering is truly capable of, the actual ride experience of Smuggler's Run feels comparatively thin. An experience that, in my opinion, lacks the depth and repeatability of Star Tours, which is just a short walk away. For a land built on one of the most iconic franchises of all time, and with all of its ambition and scale, Galaxy's Edge feels like it still hasn't reached its full potential, and has arguably done a pretty big disservice to one of the largest media franchises ever. And perhaps, more than anything, it just feels unfinished.